Euthanasia is being offered as a form of compassion, an act of mercy. But is it really? We'll talk about that and more in this edition of Life Matters with Brian Johnston. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Well, hello and welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on life, culture, and the very real battle of ideas. This battle is real and it truly is raging. The battle is for your mind and the minds of your loved ones to convince you of ideas that sound good. These ideas sound very good, and yet the implications are very grave. In the battle of ideas, it is not overstatement. It is not hyperbole to remind you that lives are at stake in this battle. You know about the right to life for unborn children. You know that these babies are being thrown out for any reason or no reason in particular. That's what's meant by choice. So it's not about the hard cases. It's not about, fetal deformity or the mother's life is in danger. It's not for those reasons that abortion is legal. It's legal for choice. You don't need to give a reason. And again, many people don't realize that that's the state of the law under Roe v. Wade. But I'm going to talk today about a very different battle. Again, few people, even in the pro-life movement, are adequately prepared. This is the end of life debate. And the sad thing is that many people, when they're confronted with this, it's sudden. They haven't thought about it. They're in a hospital setting. They're entirely dependent on the medical professionals with white smocks and with stethoscopes, and they're very intimidated because they don't understand what's at stake, and they may assent to things to which they don't fully understand. And this is very serious for one basic reason. The medical profession is dramatically changed from what it once had been. For centuries, the medical profession, even before Christianity, the medical profession under the Hippocratic Oath swore that they would never harm a patient. When the medical profession moved, you might say, with Western Europe and the Roman Empire took over, it was then influenced by Christianity, which kept that as a great standard. And the influence of Christianity preserved the notion that a doctor must always be committed to protect a patient, but never ever intentionally harm a patient. That is now lost. I cannot overemphasize to you that premise is out the window. In California, assisted suicide has been legalized, and in every jurisdiction where it is legalized, it's usually because the State Medical Association has gone neutral on assisted suicide. They've decided to take no position. It's critically important to look at what that really means. What if the NAACP declared, we hate slavery, of course, but we've decided that we're not endorsing slavery. Understand, we're not going to endorse slavery, says the NAACP, but we're going to take a neutral position. Well, that's absurd. What if the State Police Officers Association declared that when it comes to pistol whipping bystanders or the abuse of the badge and abuse of authority, well, we don't do that personally. I would never do it as a good cop. And it's something that we're not condoning that, but we've decided as a public debate we're going to be neutral on that. Well, that police association should be investigated immediately because it's up to the police officers to get rid of the bad eggs. It's up to the police officers to make sure that the authority of the policeman is not abused. And I can tell you the NAACP is not going to go neutral on slavery. So the idea of moral neutrality in a time of great import, moral neutrality is the same as surrender. And the California Medical Association declared last year that they're neutral on a physician being involved in killing a patient, of using medicine lethally. The implications are grave. But there's another aspect that we'll get into, and it's very important that you understand the subtlety of this. We're going to hear from a good friend, Mike Hodas. He's going to tell you the story of what happened with his wife, and he didn't understand, and how the medical professionals had an agenda of their own. that they hid from Mike, but it's an agenda now we see more and more of, and that is non-treatment with the purpose of ending the life of the patient. Now, it's clear in many situations, we're not talking about interventions. We're not talking about, heart-lung transplants. We're not asking for extraordinary care. What we're talking about is non-treatment of basic care, that if you or I don't have food and water, we're going to die, whoever you are. And when that's denied to a patient, that's not extraordinary care. That is the sustenance of life. The intent is that the patient be dead. The problem is that the patient is living too long. And the fact is that giving someone food and water is very effective at keeping them alive. They call it futility, but they're not referring to the food and water because giving food and water is effective. They're referring to the patient's life as a futile life. This particular human being, we just don't want them to be alive anymore. Their desire is to end the life of the patient. This is happening much more often than you may imagine. It's happening in many nursing homes. I have been witness to it. And often they want the family to agree so they can wash their hands of responsibility. This is what the family wanted. And they try to talk the family into it. They tried to talk Mike Hotus into it. And he didn't want to go along. So they hid it from him, and he'll tell his story. But I want you prepared because this is a battle that's not going to be waged on the radio. It's not going to be on a talking head program on Sunday mornings. It's not going to be decided down at the courthouse. It's going to come to your kitchen table. And if you're not prepared, if you don't realize what they're asking of you at the time, you will succumb in this battle. And lives that could go on for years. It actually happened in my family. And I had family members that wanted food and water taken away from my mother. Now, I was the only family member that resisted that pressure, and my mother lived for 2 years after that and enjoyed those 2 years. So it's very important to realize there's an agenda in medicine. It's changed its fundamental premise. This is a battle of ideas, and the ideas that have made medicine great have been twisted and perverted now. And if you don't recognize that, you're going to succumb and your loved ones will succumb. So we want to prepare you with this battle. We're going to leave at the end with some things for you to do. But first and foremost, understand, be ready. You're in a battle. Be ready with the right answer. Be ready to give an answer. Be ready to stand for those that can't protect themselves.
You're listening to Life Matters.
Well, hi. I just wanted to thank you for joining me. I have good friends, children, young adults, and adults that have Down syndrome. And they are so loved. Their parents love them so much because they're the happiest people you'd ever want to know. I really love them. I'm going to tell you something, though, that's rather frightening. The government of France has now prohibited showing positive images of Down syndrome children and letting parents know how lovable they are. That's an actual law in France. Here in the U.S., 80-some-odd% of Down syndrome kids are killed by abortion before they're born. In France, it's 96%. So we're not a whole lot better. If you'd like to help out, you can go to the National Down Syndrome Society, ndss.org, to help out. That's ndss.org. We really are in a battle of ideas, and lives really are at stake.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back, and as I mentioned to you, this is a battle about caring for those who are most vulnerable. And that's been the debate all along in the right to life. Remember, in the right to life, we're not talking about healthy and hale people like you. They don't try to kill me. They don't try to kill you. What's happened is that in 1973, the law that had protected unborn children, and every state had these laws, those were removed by the Supreme Court of the United States. And so those vulnerable human beings were killed. At the end of life in euthanasia, it isn't healthy people they want to kill. It's those that are burdensome, that are costing money. It's those people that certain other people think shouldn't be alive. That's a life that shouldn't be around anymore. And this is a pattern that is exactly what happened in Germany. And this is before the end of the war. In the 1930s, there was a program called the T4 program in Germany named for Tiergarten 4. Tiergarten 4 is the address in Berlin where they planned this out. There were a lot of World War I vets that were in long-term care. Mustard gas had been used in World War I, and a lot of these gas victims were entirely dependent on the state. They were costing the healthcare system. They had a National Socialist healthcare system, and this government healthcare system didn't want to keep paying for them. There were also individuals that were considered idiots. You've heard that term. That's actually a legal technical term regarding to someone's ability and intellect. Children with disabilities. They did not want the genetic pool of the German people to be reproduced and to be harmed. So this was actually a benefit. It was not targeted initially at the Jews. It was targeted at the Aryan class, the Aryan people. So the imperfect Aryans were removed. They were killed, often through denying them food and water if they were dependent, and then finally through gas, the gas that later was used in the gas chambers. And so you can look that up, the T4, our Tiergarten 4 program in Germany, and it was called Compassion. And any of you have read my book, Death as a Salesman, I actually have the articles from 1933 from the New York Times where they cover the story, how the Germans were going to kill those who were dependent, but they would do it out of compassion. It was mercy killing. And that attitude is what we're fighting. It wasn't just people with a German accent. We were fighting an attitude towards other human beings, a philosophy, an idea. And the battle of ideas is still with us, and you have to be ready for it. So I'm going to have us join now with Mike Hodas. He's going to tell a story about his wife and how he saw firsthand that the medical profession that formerly had sworn to always care for the vulnerable, how it's changed here in California in particular. But you need to know it's changed throughout the nation, and you have to be ready to stand and be an advocate for those that can't advocate for themselves. So I'm on with a good friend, Mike Hotus, and I met Mike through an unfortunate turn of events. We're both very concerned about how the medical profession has changed, how it's abandoned its basic principle of always caring for but never harming patients. And Mike told me a very sad story about his wife. And Mike, I'd like, if you could, to retell part of that story.
Okay, this is what happened in the hospital to Lori. She was diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis, the rarest and worst type, in 1987. Mm-hmm. As they continued to progress, she was having an increasing problem swallowing solid food. For a few days before the fatal week, she had a feeding tube placed into her stomach to provide her with nutrition. Mm-hmm. On the evening of January 13th, 2012, as we were feeding her, she could not hold down the formula. It appears the directions of the nutritionist, which we had followed exactly as directed, caused her overfeeding. It is clear that over a year of not eating well, her stomach had shrunk. This was never considered by the nutritionist. We took her to the emergency room to get her deep suction. They stopped the flow very quickly, but the regurgitation had affected the amount of oxygen in her blood to below normal. So she was admitted into the intensive care unit, presumably to help her improve her blood oxygen level. Backing up in this short story, shortly before this, Lori had been in hospital twice. First to have her pump provided medication to prevent rigidity and a very small dose of morphine replaced because the older model expired. The plain doctor did not think to lower the morphine dosage due to the more effectiveness of the new pump. The morning after she came home, we immediately realized that she was having a morphine overdose, so we brought her back to the hospital to reverse the overdose. Mm-hmm. This was done immediately after an injection of naloxone or Narcan, which immediately snapped her out of the overdose. Lori was then admitted to the hospital for observation. It was at this time the feeding tube was placed in her stomach. Both of these times, the hospitalist told me they wanted to stop treating Lori. Strongly disagreed. Told the doctor, I wanted Lori treated to the best of their capability. The first time it was a brief conversation. The second time we had an intense argument. The hospital abruptly left the room.
Who was it that left the room?
The hospitalist. The hospitalist that was in charge of Lori's treatment those two times, when the pump was replaced and when Lori overdosed because the morphine dosage was too high for the new pump.
So it's called a hospitalist? That's the person in charge?
Yeah, that's the doctor who's in charge of a hospitalization. They're called a hospitalist, the doctor. Okay.
Very good.
I use that term, okay? That's what they're called. Back in the hospital, the morning of the first day, I saw the new hospitalist for the first time. Only got to ask him one question. He was very abrupt and made it clear he didn't want to talk. Could Lori be fed intravenously? They abruptly said absolutely no. And she would regurgitate the food and it would cause pneumonia. I did not realize at that time that was absurd. The food is not going into her stomach, so how could she regurgitate it?
Yes.
Most of the rest of the story is directly from the doctor's and nurse's hospital report. After the first day, the doctor declared Lori to be futile, unrecoverable in hospital terms. He also stated, report not to tell husband what we are doing because he is opposed to it, and underlined this in the report. On the second day, he put her on comfort care, the hospital's euphemism for euthanasia. Now remember, I didn't know any of this. From the first day, Lori said she wanted to go home. She somehow sensed something was wrong. On the fourth day, he had her water withheld. After the dehydration started, she began to complain that her mouth was so dry she could not swallow. So we tried to moisten her mouth and lips. One time the nurse came in while we were doing this and ordered us to immediately stop, that we cannot provide treatment. On the morning of the sixth day, the doctor came at a time I was there, meaning at 6 a.m., as he had been doing, probably to avoid me. He asked me, could he put Lori on a small amount of intravenous morphine for pain? I mistakenly agreed, thinking only about pain and Lori. However, she had not been complaining of intense pain. I barely got to tell him not to increase the morphine without my approval before he left the room. However, they regularly increased the dosage. After he left the room, he ordered her breathing mask to be removed. She was using that part of the time to help her with breathing. I complained very strongly to the head nurse. She told me to call the doctor. I called him more than 6 times during the day. He never returned my calls, nor did I ever see him again. On the 7th day at 6 a.m., Lori stopped breathing. This was primarily caused by the combination of lack of food and water and the ever-increasing morphine dosage. In fact, her last labs taken 5 hours found her to be completely normal. Blood oxygen normal, infection none. Scant formula in her system. Lori's will to live was very strong.
You're listening to Life Matters.
We'll take a brief moment now and talk about you and what you can do regarding life matters and what really matters in life. And that is that the laws should protect you, and every innocent human being has just as much value as you have. So the laws should protect every innocent human life. The National Right to Life Committee is made up of 50 affiliates, one in every state. If you're in California, go to californiaprolife.org. and you can find out more what you can do locally. But if you're in another state, you can go to the National Right to Life website, nrlc.org, and there you'll see the listing of all the states. National Right to Life is a federation of people dedicated to restoring the right to life to our nation. It's the basic principle on which this entire nation was built. We invite you to join us and to act locally to make a difference in this great nation.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Hi, this is Brian Johnston, and I'm on again with my friend Mike Hodas, and I was talking with Mike. The reality is that what we're seeing in medicine is a presumption of death, and they're using little words that are very misleading. If it's the first time you're dealing with these professionals, they have deep meaning, and it sounds good, but when they use a word like futility, or they use a word like comfort care, it's actually code for saying, we don't want to take care of this patient anymore. And they're dismissing the value of that human life, even though this patient may actually have months or years ahead of them. They've decided already. Mike, you actually heard this from an attending physician at a hospital in San Francisco regarding your wife. Isn't that right?
Yep, I would say some of it, and most of it is directly from the hospital report that was filled out by the doctor and the nurses.
And so they admit that their intention was not to follow your request, even though you had authority. They were ignoring your request to care for your wife. They had determined that her life was futile. They were speaking about her life, not the treatment. The treatment is actually effective. That's the irony, that the food and water and the care they were going to give would actually be effective, and that would keep her alive. So the word futility was being applied to your wife.
That's correct.
And so this is the way the language has shifted so that it sounds like they're caring, but in fact, they're deciding, no, these people need to be dead. And there's an entire class of human beings that now medical ethics has said, these people should be dead, and by gum, they're not dead yet. Our job is to ensure they are. And so if you take away food and water from someone, there can only be one result. And in the case of your wife, Mike, you had actually left very specific instructions for the care of your wife. Isn't that right?
And also she had an advance directive which said do not withhold food or water, and her physician's order for continuing treatment, or the pulse, said that same thing. There's a place there where you can write do not withhold water, and they ignored both of those legal documents.
And you had this in writing. Later you found out they were intentionally keeping information from you because you knew you wanted your wife cared for. It's deeply alarming.
Brian, I did not know any of this was happening because they refused to tell me anything. The nurses refused to say anything. We don't know. We can't. We just don't know.
Well, you mentioned something to me, Mike, and we talked about it earlier on our program, how when food and water is taken away from the patient, very often they'll up the dose of a morphine or some type of drug to quiet the patient. And the reason is not because the patient is in pain, it's so the patient will not complain of thirst, so that the patient will simply succumb quietly. So the purpose of that morphine isn't really for pain. And I think that you specifically confronted that in her circumstance. Isn't that right?
Yes, but it's not to calm the patient. It's to basically kill the patient. When you give a patient morphine, a patient who has a respiratory problem, which is counterindicated, and a patient who has had no food and no water, it multiplies the effectiveness of that morphine in stopping the respiratory system. So it is an act to kill the person.
So it's actually designed to suppress breathing ultimately, and so the patient quietly succumbs.
That's correct.
Well, thanks for joining us. I hope that you gained some insight from Mike Hotus' experience and how he lost his wife's life at the hands of the medical professionals that were supposed to be caring for her. Others of you have joined us when we've talked to Bobby Schindler. Bobby Schindler was Terry Schiavo's brother. And many of you know the story of Terry Schiavo. It was a nationwide story. Very similar circumstance where a patient who's not terminal but is declared to be no longer a life worthy of living is intentionally killed through what was at one time called medical malpractice, intentional medical abuse, taking away the sustenance of life from someone who has no other way of getting it. And they then succumb to that dehydration. Often they'll add other drugs, as Mike talked about, to quickly try to speed things up because they want to finish them off. It's the compassionate thing to do. But understand that the intention is to kill the patient. This battle is real and it's on us, and you'll hear of other things that you can do now to fight in this battle.
I know that this has been a pretty tough issue to hear about if you're hearing about it for the first time. If you came into the pro-life movement through the abortion issue, that's good because you realize abortion is taking a human life, a vulnerable human life, and it's taking it medically. So it might seem nice because doctors are involved, but now what we have is doctors involved in killing a human being that someone says shouldn't be around. That human being we need to get rid of, that dependent and vulnerable person, that little baby. But at the other end of life, many people aren't prepared for the emotional arguments that are being used to do exactly the same thing with those that we consider to be unnecessary, problematic, that should be dead. We don't need this person around right now. That's called euthanasia. It's sold as voluntary euthanasia through the idea of assisted suicide, and you and I know that our culture has moved to embrace that. It's our responsibility to be prepared to oppose such things. It is truly an evil use of the law and of medicine to kill a vulnerable person. And for 3,000 years, it's been against medical ethics and the laws of most just civilizations. Where it's been violated, we have seen the results, and we've talked about that too. We want to prepare you in this battle of ideas. And I've written a book, it's called Death as a Salesman. What's wrong with assisted suicide? It goes through all of the situation we're facing now and through the history of this long debate. And we want to prepare you so that you can understand this. For a donation of any amount, we'll send you a copy of Death as a Salesman, What's Wrong with Assisted Suicide. And if you donate to the California Pro-Life Council, you can send your check to P.O. Box 935, Sacramento, California, 95812. That's P.O. Box 935, Sacramento, California, 95812. Or you can go to californiaprolife.org. That's californiaprolife.org. Or call our 800 number, 800-924-2490. And we'll send out for you your copy of Death as a Salesman, What's Wrong with Assisted Suicide. You might want to get it for your pastor or for your Bible study leader. We want you to have the tools. We want you equipped to understand the very real battle of ideas that's raging all around us. It's a battle that, if we ignore, will only get worse. But Christians, above all, should be prepared to give an answer. They should be ready to stand on behalf of those that cannot defend themselves. So it's important to be equipped in this battle. We want to give you the resources, and I'd be glad to get that book out to you. Death as a Salesman, What's Wrong with Assisted Suicide. And again, you can go to californiaprolife.org. When you make a donation there, put it in the note that you would like to get a copy of Death as a Salesman, What's Wrong with Assisted Suicide, and we'll get that right out to you. Thank you so much for listening. We're in a very real battle for life, for our culture, and for the battle of ideas.
The California legislature is considering a bill, SB 481, which allows nursing homes to declare a conscious patient to be incompetent and then take away their food and water. These dependent patients need protection, not dismissal. Legislators need to oppose this bill. If you don't know who your California legislators are, please call California Pro-Life at 800-924-2490. Give your name and street address. We will send a message to your state legislator on your behalf asking them to oppose SB 481. Leave your email address and we will let you know how your legislator then votes. Please speak up for the vulnerable. Call 800-924-2490 and oppose SB 481.
Learn more about everything in today's show online at lifematters.life, where you'll find all the resources you need to protect life. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.